we are always in a place of protecting ourselves based on whether we are always trying to connect with everyone and please, and we'll never say no, and we'll never let somebody down, and we'll never disappoint somebody, or if we're always trying to keep our distance and not get too intimate with people for whatever reason. And we want to really understand what those choices and behaviors are serving.
Vienna Pharaon is a licensed marriage and family therapist and one of New York City's most sought-after relationship therapists. True story. She's practiced therapy for more than 15 years and is the founder and owner of the group practice, Mindful Marriage and Family Therapy. The Origins of You is her first book, fabulous book. I met Vienna through a mutual friend of ours at an event. I'm super excited that she was available to be here tonight with us. So, V, put on your camera, would you?
Hi, friend.
We asked you your top 3 tips on establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries with your partner, hence because of your expertise and all the things that you do. So let's talk about it. What do you see are the biggest challenges that people have, and what are your top 3 tips?
Okay. First, so a little background, all of my work is around understanding the family system that we grew up on, right? So I want to go back, little swivel head for all of us. I want to go back and I want to explore what it was like for us growing up and to understand our relationship with boundaries based on the boundaries that were there, the ones that were absent, how we saw the adults in our family system, use boundaries or not use boundaries, and really make sure that we have a deep understanding of that for ourselves and for our partner. Okay. So that part's really important. If we don't understand our own internal world, obviously tonight we're just talking about boundaries, but this will expand to everything. But if we don't understand our own internal world around boundaries and our partner's internal world around boundaries, we're going to hit some roadblocks there because we're not going to understand why we are trying to connect at the expense of ourselves, or why we're trying to protect ourselves at the expense of the relationship. A dear friend of ours, Dr. Ali, talks about boundaries in this way that I love, right? That protection and connection are what are at stake, right? And so when we have porous boundaries, right? We are prioritizing the connection over protection. And when we have rigid boundaries, we're prioritizing protection over connection. So we have to understand this part, this internal world, this internal makeup within ourselves and our partner. Because otherwise we're going to find ourselves having frustrations with each other if we don't understand the internal makeup. It's not an excuse, right? We always say context is not an excuse, but context is really helpful. It's really important for us to understand it. I also love talking about the concept of lowering walls. I think when we talk about boundaries a lot, it's a focus on setting a boundary. There's something so important about lifting the boundary, right? It's bringing the wall down, allowing for connection to take place. But in romantic relationships, right, we often will hear this complaint there is less connection than I want there to be, or the wall seems like it's really high up, or I can't get through to the other person. So instead of lower the wall, why can't you connect more, right? Instead of focusing on that, we want to really understand what the protection is serving, what is attached to connection. And so much of this is going to revolve around family of origin, past relationships, ruptures in trust and safety. But I love this inquiry, right? Instead of just, why can't my partner just do X, Y, Z? Right? Lower the wall, be more connective, inquire, respond to me when I ask them questions about how they're feeling or what's going on in their lives, right? It's we really want to understand what is attached and associated with connection. And if their history has a story where there is enmeshment, where they were in a role as a child where they had to do more than what was appropriate. They were the caretaker. They were the emotional relief for a parent, right? A lot of times that can get really confused in this space. And so this wall goes up where they don't want to connect because connection is tied to overwhelm. It's
Yeah.
tied to stress. It's tied to being in a savior role. It's tied to something that feels intolerable to them.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that part about boundaries feels important. And I think that inquiry in our relationships, like, why will this person not do this? Or why is this person doing this? And I think when we start to peel these layers back with ourselves and in our relationships, we're going to really understand the depth here, right? Because implementing boundaries or lifting boundaries, it's not as simple as just do it. We know that. We have to come at this from a place of understanding what the blocks are serving. Our behavior makes sense in context.
Yeah.
Okay, always. We know that.
Yeah.
And we are always in a place of protecting ourselves based on whether we are always trying to connect with everyone and please, and we'll never
Yeah.
say no, and we'll never let somebody down, and we'll never disappoint somebody,
Yeah.
or if we're always trying to keep our distance and not get too intimate with people for whatever reason. And we want to really understand what those choices and behaviors are serving. And with that, I guess I'm kind of riffing here. I don't know how many I have said so far, but I do think it's important in a relationship to understand whether we lean towards connection or whether we lean towards protection more. Just identify that in your relationship first. Just know, where do I lean towards more? Do I lean more towards this way in conflict,
Mhm.
especially? Right. I love, conflict is such a tricky one. It's so beautiful if we can find these ways through. But if you lean more towards connection, like, ooh, there's a rupture here and I need to stay connected to you because I am so afraid of abandonment, or I'm so
Mhm.
afraid of loss, or I'm so afraid of what space means to me, that I'm going
Mhm.
to force connection. In conflict, if I lean towards protection, I got to get away. I have to distance myself. I have to disconnect from this in order to restabilize or reground, right? So knowing these things and being able to offer them to our partners and let us know, like, here's what I know about myself. Here's
Right.
what I know I go towards.
Right.
Here's why I go to that place. I'm working on this, right? And again, layers and complexity to it, but I'm working on navigating how we move and dance together in this
Yeah.
space.
It's so beautiful, and it's so true. And I think that the real keys to what you're saying, V, is that the communication piece, it's not just enough for us to sort of decode, okay, I lean towards connection, and if I'm drawn to someone who leans towards protection, now we're in some kind of a frustrating dance. Now we have to take it one step further, where we're willing to work on our part of it. Hopefully our partner is too. But this really speaks to, how do we come back together, right? How do we deal with, because really what we're talking about boundaries in regular life, but so much of the time it's about, how do we come back together? How do we handle conflict, right? Do I feel threatened? Do I run away from conflict with my partner, or do I tell the truth about how I feel? And I think that a lot of it with boundaries has to do with how we handle conflict.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think part of this is increasing our tolerance level. It's the hard part of this, is that setting a boundary or lifting a boundary doesn't always feel like a mic drop moment or an empowered moment, where you walk off. When we are disappointing another person, or when we're letting someone down, or when there has to be a consequence, right? Like, when we are ultimately choosing something for the self in a particular moment, which means that someone else might be upset. There is a tolerance there that is required of us. And when our tolerance levels, right, are
Mhm.
too weak, then we crumble. And so there's this discomfort that we really have to get okay with. And that's a hard thing to do. Right. Like,
Yep.
this, again, is not a walk in the park, but so much of this is our ability to dial up our tolerance level to
Yep.
be able to withstand that discomfort. One of my favorite lines from a favorite poem, The Invitation. You might know this one. I want to
Mhm.
know if you can disappoint another to stay true to yourself. That's it. That's it. That has so much to do with boundary setting. And for so many of us, I remember when I read that for the first time and I was like, gulp, no way, not interested. I
Right.
can't tolerate it. The
Yeah.
idea of it, I cannot tolerate it. right? To lose
Mm,
connection, to have somebody upset with me. I know what all of those things mean based on how I grew up.
yep.
Silent treatment, punishment, abuse, right? Like all of these things.
Mhm.
Woo, no, thank you. Right. And to be able to work through and resolve some of the things that need to be resolved in order to get to a place in our lives where our tolerance for that,
Yep.
our capacity to withstand it
Mm,
is available to us. It's
and
hard work, but
it
that
is.
is where it is.
Yep.
Mhm.
It changes though too. It's like when you first, like I can go back and think of like the first big boundary conversations I had in my life when I was just sort of growing up. I'd been in therapy for a long time, but the child within me was so positive that the world was going to just stop spinning on its axis. Like everyone was going to be spontaneously bursting into flames, like for sure. I was like,
Yeah.
everyone's going to die from this action that I'm taking. And it was, even though it felt intolerable, I still did it. And then the confidence starts where you go, oh my God, like it's okay. And now I'm not so pissed off all the time and I'm not so
Right.
frustrated and I feel better understood, you know?
Yeah, it's this invitation to be in relationship with self differently. It brings us closer to ourselves when we start to do that. And you're right, like there is a confidence that actually does start to build after we do it for the first time, the second time, the third time, right? It really starts to strengthen this muscle. But yes, to what you said, they're all going to die. Like the internal death takes place too. It feels like death for some of us to step into that, right? And I think the awareness of that this isn't just oh, you're going to feel really good on the other side of this. It's like, no, you're probably going to feel like total shit on the other
Yep.
side of it for some time. Right.
Yes, but it does get better. And I think that
Yes.
when nobody died that first time, and then when nobody died that second time, and when nobody died that third time,
Mhm.
and since the whole time I've been doing it now, nobody's died. There's something so satisfying about knowing that you have the capability of telling the truth about how you
Yeah.
feel and that you're being authentic in your life. And I feel like when I was more of a people pleaser in my early 20s, I was not an emotionally trustworthy person, not because I'm a bad person, because I was a pleaser. And so that you're not
Yeah.
telling the truth, right? You're not telling the truth if
Yeah.
you're a pleaser. And that's having bad internal boundaries. I mean, that's what it is, right?
Right. Yeah. I didn't tell the truth for such a long time. I was a boundaryless little girl who
Yep.
turned into a boundaryless adult. And I'll put the asterisks in here. It is never a child's responsibility to have boundaries. It's always the environment and the adults around us to create the environment in which healthy boundaries exist. Okay. But I had no boundary. I didn't know what it was. And I had parents around me who were going through really, really hard stuff, crashing and burning. And I believed, right, my perception of the system around me was that they were not well. And so there wasn't space for me to not be okay. And so I was fine.
Yep.
I was okay. I was unaffected. I was good, turned into I'm the cool girl. I'm down for everything. I'm unaffected. I'm unbothered. This is how I'm going to keep connection, right? This is what I
Mhm.
believed, right? And so I was not telling the truth
Right.
ever. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to share my pain. I didn't even have a relationship with it. It was too far away from me because
Yep.
I didn't believe that there was space for it. And I remember in my late 20s, I was dating someone and their ex came back into the picture and he's trying to decide whether to go back into the relationship with her, to stay in the relationship with me. And boom, pleaser came out, therapist also came out.
Yep.
Totally understand. Take all the time in the world that you need. This must be so hard for you. Let me understand your
No.
story, yada, 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 right? All of it. And I remember having a conversation with a friend and it all clicked in. It's like, shoot, there's the role. There's the same exact role from childhood to this moment in time. And I remember it took some time. I had to like name the wound and I had to witness my pain and the loss and really grieve. But then eventually I was able to say to the guy, I'm going to remove myself from this equation. I actually am not okay with what's
Mm.
happening. I feel disrespected here. And Terri, for somebody who's never said those things before, who's never said, I'm not okay, right? Like this was so
Yeah.
hard to get this out of my mouth. And I did it. And like I said before, this wasn't a mic drop moment. You know, this wasn't like, yeah,
It's like
I'm
sweaty and
amazing.
messy and just
like on the floor, didn't get out of bed, right? Like this was hard, was hoping that he'd come back around. You know, it was like all
Yep.
of those things.
Yep.
And that's the thing with boundaries and telling the truth, is that you often don't get the outcome that you want in that moment. Right? Because we're nearsighted, right? It's like
Yep.
we often don't get the outcome that we really think we need in that moment and want in that moment. But for me, the confidence builder was I came off the tracks that had been deeply embedded.
Yeah.
I came off of them and I started to create a new set of tracks, and it was hard and it felt like a death. And I was crying for,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
weeks, months it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it was awful. Right. And also is like, I did it. I did it. And I'm still here.
Yeah.
And there's right. Like, and there's still people around me. And
Yeah.
I began to build that muscle over and over and over again. And so I just share that because I think it's very consistent with what you were saying before. And now my husband will laugh. He's like, not the same guy, but my husband's like, I have never heard you not be truthful and honest and share how you really feel. So
You're like,
don't look
therapy
back.
works, people. That's all we're saying.
It works. Don't look back. Yeah,
That's correct.
exactly.
Thank you so much, V. I so appreciate you coming and celebrating and spending time with us.
Thank you, Terri. I love you and your boundary queenness, and so honored to be here.
Woohoo.
Everybody's
All right.
very
Well, thank you,
excited.
my friend. I appreciate you.